Well, we want to switch gears slightly, but not fully. Sadly, we're still talking about violence, war, the possibility for even more war, and worldwide destructive nuclear war. And now we're shifting to East Asia, the issue of the U.S.-China rivalry. And we are very happy, very honored to be joined by Dr. Ken Hammond, who's a professor of East Asian and Global History at New Mexico State University, founding director of the Confucius Institute at New Mexico State, and also an activist with Pivot to Peace. Ken, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, glad to be here.
There, perfect.
Gotta turn my mic on, right?
Yeah, this is the times we're living in, I'm telling you. Well, Ken, a lot has been happening. Obviously, just before we came on, really, Secretary of State Antony Blinken also discussing sort of U.S. policy towards Taiwan. And I guess what I want to start here with, from your perspective, is the U.S. is now insisting that Biden's comments that the U.S. would be militarily involved if there was a conflict in Taiwan, they would challenge China militarily. The U.S. is saying, well, there's no change in our posture. Everything's the same. This isn't anything alarming. Don't look over here. It's all fine. Is that true? I mean, were this just a gaffe that was walked back, or is there something more deeper here?
Well, if it's a gaffe, it's the third example of this. He's done this a couple of times before, where he's made these off-the-cuff comments about U.S. military engagement with China, direct military engagement with China over the Taiwan situation, and then his spin doctors have to walk it back. So, to say it's a gaffe, I mean, fool me once, that's my problem, or your problem. Fool me twice, it's my problem, and fool me three times, it's all of our problem. So I think that the idea that that this is just they want to trot out this concept of strategic ambiguity. But what's clear is that President Biden has a lot of ambiguity himself in his ability to articulate the American position. I think that he says things that come into his head at a certain point. He maybe doesn't remember exactly what the policy actually is. Once he's out there speaking, he doesn't have somebody who's feeding him his lines, and he says things that then have to be spun in a way that gets them back to the actual formal legal commitments of the American government, which are to the one China policy, the idea that Taiwan is part of China. There's only one China. Taiwan's part of it. Everybody on both sides of the straits agrees to that. There's some dispute over who the actual government is, but the vast majority of countries in the world recognize the People's Republic. So I think that this is dangerous to have Biden going around saying these kinds of things. It only ratchets up an already overly tense situation that American politicians have created. But I don't think it really reflects a deep rethinking of American policy, because American policy has been hostile and aggressive for years now. But it reflects some, how shall we say, some looseness in controlling the message.
Ken, also, just before Biden made these comments, there was this piece that came out in Politico speaking to various unnamed officials inside the Biden administration, talking about how they are essentially encouraging Taiwan to take a page from the Ukraine playbook. And they're even beginning to change their strategy and how they arm Taiwan. They're actually telling Taiwan, we're not going to give you these weapons anymore. We're actually going to give you these weapons in case there's a Ukraine scenario, meaning like anti-aircraft, Stinger missiles and things like this, rather than the sort of, I guess, like fighter jets that they've previously given Taiwan. And so I guess, what was really concerning about this is they were essentially saying that we want to see your country destroyed, or we want to see your territory destroyed. They're essentially saying the Taiwanese should start preparing for some sort of actual hot war with China, where they'll have to sacrifice themselves against China. They're even trying to argue to the Taiwanese that they need to bring back some sort of conscription because they don't have enough people in their armed forces. I mean, this was really alarming to see, just because this would mean, especially if you have Biden saying, oh, we're going to militarily intervene if China invades Taiwan. So to have them actually preparing for a real life scenario where they'd be like sacrificing the Taiwanese the way that they're sacrificing Ukrainians against Russia. I mean, what do you think about this?
Well, I think that last point is exactly the issue here. That the United States is happy to have proxy wars. We're happy to have a situation where somebody else pays the price. This is what we're doing in Ukraine. The U.S. pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed with NATO until Russia finally reached a point where they felt that they had to take countermeasures. And that's a rough situation. It's a very, very unpleasant situation. Obviously, one that China has been very consistent in calling for negotiation and calling for resolving this, on a diplomatic basis. But it's one that basically it was structured and created by the U.S. and the expansion of NATO. But what it does is it gives the United States the opportunity to have Ukrainians getting killed and having their cities destroyed and having all this turmoil going on, while Americans sit home and watch it on TV or listen to it on NPR and wring their hands and worry about white refugees for once, instead of all the people that we destroyed for 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria. The double standards that we've seen around the Ukraine situation are phenomenal. Now we see American politicians, explicitly invoking Ukraine as a sort of parallel case to Taiwan, which is false on its fundamental premises, because Ukraine is a sovereign state. This is a dispute between sovereign countries. It's a situation where if anybody is violating, those fundamental principles, it's the U.S. and NATO with their constant pressure. But Taiwan is part of China, and the United States is formally, legally committed to that position. So to ramp it up and say that that we won't tolerate China taking Taiwan by force, Taiwan is already part of China, and the government on the island, the local authorities on the island, have the same position. So it's the cognitive dissonance that comes with this rhetoric is pretty serious. And again, I think it reflects the idea that the U.S., it's American politicians driving the tensions over Taiwan as a way of trying to put pressure on China, demonize China, constrain China's rise. And this is a very, very dangerous game for them to be playing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, Ken. And, of course, it also speaks to what you just said about, trying to sort of hem China in. Blinken saying we're going to try to shape the strategic environment around China. And I think it gets to kind of a core issue here for Americans, which is, should we actually fear China? Because I think that's really the underlying factor. Is it's like, well, if they're evil, shouldn't we be trying to constrain them, and so on and so forth? So could you speak to that issue? Because to me, it feels like that's the root cause of it all. Like, I mean, should we fear them, or is there scope for cooperation that is unexplored currently?
Well, there really ought to be. No, I mean, China has not, it's not China that's ramping up the situation over Taiwan. China has not been saying, we are so really just chomping at the bit. We want to get in there and mix it up, and we're gonna invade on a moment's notice. That's not China saying that stuff. This is the United States. The U.S. has really evolved over the last decade plus this kind of comprehensive anti-China campaign, whether it's these bogus charges of genocide in Xinjiang, or the secret support that the National Endowment for Democracy, fed into the turmoil in Hong Kong, or the provocations by the U.S. Navy in the South China Sea or in the Taiwan Strait. There's this comprehensive approach of trying to contain and constrain China, trying to slow down China's development, its reemergence as a significant factor in global affairs. That's not going to work, but that is what they're trying to do. And so, to do that, they have to make China seem like the bad guys. China has to be the enemy. China has to be the one who's the aggressor. And we hear that kind of language. But where are they aggressing? They're out there in the world. They're engaged in a lot of international activities. They're taking part in the global fight against COVID, against the pandemic. They're taking part in economic development in many countries around the world on a mutually beneficial basis. They're not. China historically has never been an expansive colonialist overseas, let us project our power kind of country. That's the United States. That's the European heritage. Western imperialism has shaped the world and wants to continue that shape. But that's not going to be the way it is going forward. China isn't rising up and becoming some aggressive superpower. China is simply returning to a role of significance, which it occupied for many centuries until Western imperialism disrupted that. So the idea that China is the problem, of course, that's what politicians have to say. They can't say, well, we don't want the Chinese people to have greater prosperity. We don't want the Chinese people to have a better healthcare system. We don't want the Chinese people to achieve technological innovation and develop their economy. They can't say that, but that's exactly what they mean. But they spin it, by saying, oh, evil China, scary China. It's the old yellow peril, red scare. We get to hear both of those messages again. And it's sad. It's built on the fundamental reality that a lot of people in the United States don't really know much about China. And the media, which is in lockstep with the elite politicians and the military, just spout these lies, spout these stories. They're really busy right now pre-positioning their dismissal of the United Nations report on the situation in Xinjiang. They've already come out. The Bachelet hasn't even gotten out there yet, and the U.S. has already dismissed anything she could possibly say. So China has to be the evil other out there, and that's just that's why we have to talk about it. We have to be people that push back against that.
Yeah, it's well said. I guess, lastly, Ken, I'd want to know, how do you see the conflict in Ukraine, aside from how it might be having an impact on the way the U.S. views Taiwan? Or wants to use Taiwan. How do you see the conflict in Ukraine impacting China's calculations in terms of how they might perceive their ability to have a relationship with the U.S. when they see how far the U.S. has gone to try to weaken Russia?
I think it's got to have it's got to be having an influence on strategic thinkers in China. Because it certainly demonstrates not just the willingness but the eagerness of the U.S. and its allies in NATO to pursue this kind of proxy campaign. If the U.S. can trigger a conflict over Taiwan, if they could somehow push China far enough that actual hostilities would break out, it's not going to be the United States taking the hit. It's going to be the people of Taiwan. It's going to be people in Fujian province on the mainland, elsewhere. There are books that have been published about this. The Council on Foreign Relations has gotten jazzed up about this, about how China can be made to pay a price. Of course, they're paying a price for something they haven't done. But the idea is that if they can trigger military conflict, that could be escalated to the point where it would inflict severe damage on China and on Taiwan. But the United States thinks that it's going to walk away scot-free. I don't think that that's an accurate assessment, and I think that there are those in the military who are well aware of that. I think that if we cast our memory back to that point where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs called his counterpart in China during that period where we were having troubles with the election at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, and said, "Don't worry, we're not going to launch an attack on you." He did that to defuse a situation which the military understands can be very problematic. And I don't think a lot of people in the U.S. military want to go one-on-one with China. China has pursued its own defense, its own ability to control its military environment in ways that I think have largely neutralized the ability of the U.S. to just sort of move its pieces around on the chessboard. But we certainly don't want to see that get tested in reality, even though a lot of American politicians seem willing and eager, if not able, to envision that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Ken Hammond, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and we appreciate you coming on and giving us some of your time to help us sort through it all.
Glad to be here. Call me anytime.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.